In the United States, some teenage criminals have committed such horrific acts that they were sentenced to death or life in prison. From ruthless murders to chilling crime sprees, their actions sealed their fate behind bars forever. In this video, we'll expose the shocking cases of young offenders who faced execution or spent their lives awaiting justice. Welcome to Criminal Records. Dylann Roof, State, South Carolina. On June 17, 2015, Dylann Roof, a 21-year-old man with a history of racist beliefs, entered the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, during a Bible study session. Roof, who had attended the service for nearly an hour, began a shooting spree, killing 9 innocent people, including Reverend Clementa Pinckney, the church's pastor. Roof specifically targeted the church due to its historical significance as a center for African American worship and activism. His actions were later revealed to be motivated by his belief in white supremacy and his desire to instigate a race war. Roof had expressed his racist ideology through online platforms, where he shared his manifesto and other writings espousing hate. His actions on that fateful evening mirrored these beliefs. After the shooting, Roof fled the scene and was arrested the following day in Shelby, North Carolina. The authorities' investigation revealed that Roof had attended a number of hate group websites and had even photos of himself with flags associated with white supremacy, further confirming his hate-fueled motives. In December 2016, Roof was convicted of federal hate crimes and other charges. During his trial, Roof's defense sought to argue that he was mentally unstable, but his views and actions spoke volumes about his extremist ideology. Roof was sentenced to death in January 2017, making him one of the most notorious white supremacist terrorists in U.S. history. He remains on death row, awaiting execution. His case continues to be a point of reflection on the nation's struggle with racial tensions, gun violence, and the ongoing debate over capital punishment. Willard Miller, State, Iowa. On November 2, 2021, 16-year-old Willard Miller, along with his friend Jeremy Goodale, carried out the horrific murder of their Spanish teacher, Nohema Graber, in Fairfield, Iowa. The murder stemmed from Miller's frustration with the grade he received in Graber's class. The two students lured Graber to a local park, where they ambushed her, beating her with a baseball bat and causing fatal blunt force trauma. They then covered her body with a tarp to conceal their crime. Graber's disappearance sparked a search that led to the discovery of her body the following day. Authorities quickly linked Miller and Goodale to the crime after reviewing digital evidence, including social media exchanges between them, which confirmed their premeditated plan to kill the teacher. Miller's arrest and the subsequent investigation revealed the cold and calculated nature of the crime. Miller was charged with first-degree murder, and in 2023, he pleaded guilty to the crime, admitting his role in the killing. The case drew national attention, as the motive behind the murder, an academic dispute, was both shocking and tragic. During his sentencing in July 2023, the judge condemned Miller's lack of remorse and the deliberate nature of his actions. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 35 years. The case raised discussions around youth violence, the impact of academic pressure, and the psychological factors influencing such extreme behavior at a young age. James Fairweather, United Kingdom. Between 2013 and 2014, 15-year-old James Fairweather committed a series of brutal murders in Colchester, Essex, leaving a chilling legacy of violence. His first victim, 33-year-old James Atfield, was attacked in a park, stabbed more than 100 times in a violent and frenzied attack. 3 months later, Fairweather struck again, this time killing 31-year-old Nahid Almanea, a Saudi student, stabbing her 16 times on a walking trail. Fairweather's motives for the killing seemed to stem from a deep fascination with serial killers. He later admitted that he had planned to continue his killing spree, a desire driven by his obsession with murder. His violent fantasies led him to target random strangers with no clear reason other than his need to fulfill his desire for notoriety and power. Fairweather's killing spree came to an end in May 2015, when he was spotted near a potential crime. Seen armed with a knife. A concerned citizen alerted the police, leading to his arrest. During his interrogation, Fairweather showed little remorse for his actions, claiming that voices in his head had urged him to kill. His behavior raised serious concerns about his mental health, and he was ultimately diagnosed with a personality disorder. In April 2016, Fairweather was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 27 years. The case sparked a national debate about youth violence, the role of mental health, and the impact of online influence in shaping criminal behavior. Fairweather's case also highlighted the disturbing reality of teenage killers and the dangerous allure that serial killers hold over impressionable young minds. Morgan Geyser, State, Wisconsin. On May 31, 2014, 12-year-old Morgan Geyser and her friend Anissa Weier carried out a horrific attack on their classmate Peyton Leutner in Waukesha, Wisconsin. The two girls, influenced by the fictional online character Slenderman, believed that committing murder would prove their loyalty to him. They lured Leutner into the woods, where Geyser repeatedly stabbed her 19 times while Weier encouraged the attack. Miraculously, Leutner survived the vicious assault, crawling to a nearby road where a cyclist found her and alerted authorities. Geyser and Weier were arrested later that day, and both girls admitted to their crime. They explained that they had planned the murder for months, driven by their delusions surrounding Slenderman. The case captured national attention, sparking debates about the role of internet folklore in influencing youth violence. In 2017, Geyser pleaded guilty to attempted first-degree intentional homicide and was sentenced to 40 years in a mental health institution. Weier, who was also found guilty, received a 25-year sentence in a psychiatric facility. The case raised complex questions about the line between fiction and reality, the responsibility of parents, and the psychological factors that led two young girls to commit such a brutal act. The incident also sparked discussions about the dangers of online communities that glorify violence and the consequences of fantasy becoming reality in the minds of vulnerable adolescents. Rachel Schoaf and Sheila Eddy. State, West Virginia. On July 6, 2012, 16-year-olds Rachel Schoaf and Sheila Eddy lured their close friend, Skylar Neese, out of her home for a late-night drive. What seemed like an innocent night out quickly turned into a tragedy, as Schoaf and Eddy fatally stabbed Neese in a secluded, wooded area. The motivation for the murder stemmed from the girls' desire to sever their friendship with Neese, whom they no longer wanted in their lives. For months, Schoaf and Eddy successfully misled police and the community, maintaining the facade that Neese had simply run away. However, Schoaf's conscience eventually got the better of her, and she confessed to the crime in January 2013, leading authorities to Neese's body, which had been discarded in a remote part of Pennsylvania. Eddy, who initially maintained her innocence, eventually confessed when confronted with the overwhelming evidence against her. In 2014, Schoaf pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 30 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10 years. Eddy was convicted of first-degree murder and received a life sentence, eligible for parole after 15 years. The case shocked the small community in West Virginia, as it was revealed that the murder had been premeditated, and the girls had plotted it without a clear motive other than a desire to end their friendship. The case has since been the subject of numerous documentaries and discussions about the psychology behind juvenile violence, manipulation, and the emotional complexities of teenage relationships. Mackenzie Shirilla, State, Ohio. Mackenzie Shirilla, a 19-year-old from Strongsville, Ohio, was convicted of the intentional deaths of her boyfriend, Dominic Russo, and her friend, Davin Flanagan. On July 31, 2022, Sharilla drove her Toyota Camry at a high speed of 100 mph before crashing into a brick building, leading to the tragic deaths of both passengers. The crash occurred under suspicious circumstances, as it was later revealed that Sharilla had purposely driven the vehicle at such a speed to end the lives of the two individuals. A later investigation confirmed that this was not an accident, and her actions were considered deliberate. Sharilla's sentencing occurred in August 2023, where she was given a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Despite the severity of her actions, the case raised questions regarding her mental state at the time of the incident. Experts debated her level of remorse and her motivations, with some suggesting a history of troubled emotional health. As of January 2025, Sharilla has served approximately 1.5 years of her sentence and is scheduled to be eligible for parole in 2038, provided she serves the mandatory 15-year term. The case continues to attract attention due to the controversial nature of her actions, especially considering her young age. The families of both victims have expressed ongoing grief and frustration with the legal system's handling of the case, calling for stronger measures against intentional acts of violence. Dexter Darnell Johnson, State, Texas. Dexter Darnell Johnson, born July 15, 1988, became infamous for his involvement in the 2006 murders of Maria Aparice, 23, and Huey Ngo, 17, in Harris County, Texas. At the time of the killings, Johnson was 18 years old and had teamed up with 4 accomplices to carry out a brutal carjacking. The victims were forced into their vehicle and driven to a secluded location where they were both shot after being assaulted. Johnson played a key role in the crime and was eventually convicted of capital murder in 2007. At trial, his defense team argued that Johnson was intellectually disabled, citing an IQ of approximately 70, which led to lengthy appeals and legal battles. In 2019, the federal courts granted a stay of execution to further evaluate these claims. Johnson's case became a focal point in discussions about the death penalty and intellectual disabilities, with many advocating for a re-examination of his sentence. As of January 2025, Dexter Darnell Johnson remains on death row at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. His execution has been delayed multiple times as his legal team continues to push for further review of his intellectual capacity and the possibility of a life sentence. The case remains a subject of debate, with some people questioning the fairness of applying the death penalty to individuals with intellectual disabilities. Johnson's fate remains uncertain as new legal challenges may arise in the coming years. Freneta Torres, State, Georgia. Freneta Torres, a 17-year-old from Gwinnett County, Georgia, became involved in a shocking and tragic murder case in October 2018. Along with 2 accomplices, Nicholas Evans and C. Miller, Torres was arrested after a brutal robbery turned into a deadly encounter. The 3 teenagers lured 21-year-old William Tanchez with the promise of intimacy, only to rob him once he arrived at their meeting spot. During the robbery, Evans shot Tanchez fatally, while Torres took Tanchez's phone as part of the crime. Torres, Evans, and Miller were all charged with felony murder and armed robbery. At the time of the incident, all 3 were young, with Torres being just 17. The case received media attention due to the involvement of such young individuals in a violent crime. The trio was portrayed as a group of friends whose decision to commit the crime ultimately led to a senseless and tragic death. As of the latest available information, the legal proceedings for Torres and her co-conspirators were still ongoing, with their charges under investigation and trial proceedings continuing. The exact details regarding their convictions or sentencing have not been publicly disclosed as of January 2025, and it is unclear what kind of outcome Torres will face in court. The case raises questions about juvenile crime, the role of peer influence, and the consequences of violent actions in young individuals. Gregory Ramos, State, Florida. Gregory Ramos, a 15-year-old from DeBary, Florida, was arrested for the brutal murder of his mother, Gail Clevenger, in November 2018. The crime occurred after a heated argument over his poor academic performance. In a fit of rage, Ramos strangled his mother to death, and then, in an attempt to cover his tracks, he enlisted the help of two friends, Brian Porras and Jacob Seglar. Together, they buried her body in a nearby church cemetery and staged a burglary. To mislead law enforcement, Ramos's actions were chilling, and the details of the crime were described as premeditated. The young teen was initially charged with first-degree murder, abuse of a dead body, and tampering with evidence. In December 2021, Ramos pleaded guilty to the charges, accepting responsibility for his mother's death. He was sentenced to 45 years in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 25 years. The case attracted widespread attention due to the disturbing nature of the crime and the fact that it was committed by such a young person. Questions were raised about what could have driven Ramos to commit such an act at such a tender age, and what might have been done to prevent it. His sentencing was viewed as an attempt to balance the severity of the crime with the recognition of his youth. As of January 2025, Ramos is serving his sentence in a correctional facility, and he is expected to be eligible for parole in the coming decades. Krista Gale Pike, State, Tennessee. Krista Gale Pike, born on March 10, 1976 in Beckley, West Virginia, is a convicted murderer who became infamous for committing a heinous crime at the age of 18. Pike's victim, 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer, was a fellow student at Job Corps in Tennessee. Pike became consumed with jealousy after suspecting that Slemmer was trying to steal her boyfriend. In January 1995, Pike, along with two friends, Shadola Peterson and Shadra Whitehead, lured Slemmer to a remote area where they viciously attacked her. The murder involved a shocking level of brutality, as Pike and her associates taunted and slashed Slemmer, carving a pentagram into her chest. Pike ultimately smashed Slemmer's head with a chunk of asphalt, killing her. To make matters even more disturbing, Pike kept a piece of Slemmer's skull as a memento. The crime shocked the nation, and Pike was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder in 1996. She was sentenced to death. In addition to the murder conviction, Pike's violent tendencies continued after her imprisonment. In 2001, she was involved in another attack on a fellow inmate, Patricia Jones, which led to an additional conviction in 2004. Pike has been on death row for over 2 decades. As of January 2025, she has spent 29 years on death row, becoming one of the longest-serving female inmates in the United States. Her case is a striking example of the complexities surrounding juvenile crime, mental health, and the death penalty. Austin Gregory Myers, State, Ohio. In January 2014, Austin Gregory Myers, a 19-year-old from Ohio, and his accomplice Timothy Mosley, hatched a plan to rob the home of 18-year-old Justin Back. The crime took place on January 18, 2014, when the two men, armed with knives, confronted Back at his residence in the small town of Mount Healthy, near Cincinnati. The plan escalated beyond simple robbery, and Mosley fatally stabbed Back multiple times during the attack. Myers, though, not the one who directly inflicted the fatal wounds, played an active role in facilitating the crime by helping restrain Back and aiding Mosley during the robbery. The robbery, which was supposed to be a quick, non-violent crime, ended in tragic violence and death. Justin Back, a young man with a promising future, was unable to survive the brutal attack. His family, devastated by the loss, later became vocal advocates for justice. The authorities managed to track down Myers and Mosley through investigative efforts, leading to their arrests in the following days. After being charged with aggravated murder, Myers faced a lengthy trial. In October 2014, the jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to death. Myers' defense during the trial focused on the claim that he had been coerced into participating in the robbery by Mosley, who was allegedly more aggressive and forceful. Despite this, the court determined that Myers had willingly joined the criminal act and had helped Mosley in the commission of the murder. His conviction for aggravated murder and his subsequent death sentence reflected the severity of the crime. As of today, Myers remains on death row in Ohio, where his case continues to be the subject of legal appeals. Despite these efforts, his execution has not yet been carried out, and his case remains a stark reminder of the dangers and consequences of violent crime. Myers' future remains uncertain, as appeals for clemency or resentencing are still ongoing. Conrad Schaefer, Estate, Florida. Conrad Schaefer, a 15-year-old from Osceola County, Florida, embarked on a violent crime spree in June 2013 that left 2 young men dead and shocked his community. Schaefer, along with an accomplice, began his killing. The spree on June 19, 2013. That evening, he and his partner in crime, 19-year-old Robert Bobby Lee, ambushed 17-year-old David Guerrero and 22-year-old Eric Rupnerine. The 2 victims were gunned down in a senseless attack. Guerrero was found dead at the scene, while Rupnerine was able to flee but succumbed to his injuries shortly thereafter. The violence of the crime, which appeared to have no clear motive, left the community reeling. Investigators initially struggled to find leads, but Schaefer was eventually linked to the killings after a tip-off from someone who had witnessed the attack. Once arrested, Schaefer's behavior in custody seemed erratic, and his past history of mental health struggles became part of the defense's argument during his trial. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, armed robbery, and other related crimes. At trial, Schaefer's defense team argued that his youth, mental health history, and difficult upbringing should be taken into consideration in sentencing. However, the prosecution pushed for a harsh penalty, emphasizing the brutality of the murders and the senseless nature of the killings. In January 2016, Schaefer pled guilty to the murders and was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Despite being a teenager at the time of the crime, Schaefer's actions left an indelible mark on the victims' families and the community. Schaefer's case is part of a larger debate about juvenile offenders and whether or not they should face life sentences without the possibility of parole. This debate has been ongoing in the United States, particularly in light of the Supreme Court's rulings on juvenile sentencing. Schaefer will spend the rest of his life in prison, a life shaped by the choices he made on that fateful night in 2013, Jacala Ashanti Williams State, Alabama. On August 13, 2023, 18-year-old Jacala Ashanti Williams from Alabama faced a heartbreaking charge of capital murder after abandoning her newborn baby in a dumpster. The infant's body was discovered shortly after, and it was later determined that the child had died from asphyxiation. Williams had given birth to the baby in secret and chose not to utilize the state's safe haven law, which allows parents to safely surrender their newborns at designated locations such as hospitals or fire stations. The infant's death shocked the local community and led to a full investigation. Witnesses reported seeing Williams act strangely in the days leading up to the discovery of the child's body, and her actions were scrutinized during the investigation. It was eventually determined that she had intentionally placed the infant in the dumpster after birth, leading to the charges of capital murder. Williams' actions raised important questions about mental health, the pressures on young mothers, and the availability of support services for at-risk teenagers. During her trial, her defense attorney suggested that Williams had been in a state of emotional distress and had not fully understood the consequences of her actions. However, the prosecution argued that her deliberate abandonment of the infant showed a callous disregard for the life of her child, making the crime one of grave significance. Williams awaits trial for capital murder, and her case has drawn attention to the issue of teenage pregnancy, especially in a society where young mothers can sometimes feel isolated and unsupported. Her case will likely continue to be a point of legal and moral debate as it moves through the judicial system. Alec McKinney, State, Colorado. On May 7, 2019, 16-year-old Alec McKinney, along with 18-year-old Devin Erickson, carried out a devastating school shooting at STEM School Highlands Ranch, a charter school in suburban Denver, Colorado. The shooting claimed the life of Kendrick Castillo, a student who heroically attempted to stop the attackers, and left 8 other students injured. The tragic event occurred during the final weeks of the school year, shaking the entire community, and leaving lasting scars on the students, teachers, and families involved. McKinney and Erickson entered the school armed with firearms and began their attack on unsuspecting students. It was later revealed that McKinney had been struggling with mental health issues and had been influenced by Erickson, who was reportedly the more dominant figure in planning the attack. The shooting unfolded quickly, and Castillo's selfless act of bravery in trying to stop the shooters was hailed as heroic, though he tragically lost his life in the process. After being apprehended by law enforcement, McKinney was charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder and attempted murder. During his trial, McKinney pleaded guilty to all charges, acknowledging his role in the attack. He was subsequently sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Erickson, the older accomplice, faced similar charges and also received a life sentence. McKinney's case became one of many in a growing conversation about gun violence, school safety, and the treatment of juveniles in the criminal justice system. His actions, carried out while still a teenager, forced the nation to confront uncomfortable questions about the role of mental health, access to firearms, and the possibility of rehabilitation for those who commit violent acts at a young age. McKinney, who remains incarcerated, has become a symbol of the complexities of youth violence in contemporary society. Michael Shane Bargo, State, Florida. On April 18, 2011, 18-year-old Michael Shane Bargo from Summerfield, Florida, orchestrated the brutal murder of 15-year-old Seth Jackson, a crime that would shock the state and lead to a lengthy legal battle. Bargo and a group of friends lured Jackson to a secluded location under the pretense of a confrontation, where they viciously attacked him. The group beat, shot, and burned Jackson's body, eventually disposing of his remains in a nearby limestone pit. The crime was both calculated and horrifically violent. Jackson's family was left devastated by the loss, and the investigation into his death quickly unraveled the details of Bargo's involvement. Bargo's motive for the murder was later revealed to be rooted in a combination of personal animosity and an apparent desire to assert control over his social circle. Bargo had previously been involved in arguments with Jackson, and he reportedly harbored deep feelings of anger toward him. In 2014, after a trial that included the testimony of several co-conspirators, Bargo was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. The case gained national attention due to the gruesome nature of the crime and the age of the perpetrators. Bargo's defense during the trial focused on his troubled upbringing and claims of a difficult home life, but the court found that the severity of his actions warranted the ultimate punishment. Despite being sentenced to death, Bargo's legal team continues to pursue appeals, arguing that he was too young to receive the death penalty. This case raises significant questions about the fairness of sentencing juveniles to the death penalty, and whether age should be considered when determining the severity of punishment. Bargo's future remains uncertain, as he continues to challenge his conviction while serving time on death row. Elisa Bustamante, State, Missouri. On October 21, 2009, 15-year-old Elisa Bustamante from St. Martins, Missouri, lured 9-year-old Elizabeth Olton into the woods and brutally murdered her. The crime shocked the community, and what made it even more chilling was the fact that Elisa had recorded her thoughts and feelings about the murder in a journal, which would later be discovered by investigators. Bustamante's motivations for the crime were unclear at the time, but it was revealed that she had been fascinated with the idea of killing. Elisa's actions, though incredibly violent, were preceded by troubling signs of emotional and psychological issues. At the time of the crime, Elisa had reportedly been struggling with depression and had exhibited behaviors indicative of a desire for attention and control. After luring Olten to the wooded area near her home, Bustamante strangled her victim with a shoelace before slashing her throat and stabbing her. Once Olten's body was discovered, investigators quickly honed in on Bustamante, as her behavior had raised suspicion. She initially denied involvement in the crime, but was eventually charged with first-degree murder and armed criminal action. During the trial, her defense focused on her troubled upbringing and psychological issues, arguing that she had been influenced by her environment and emotional distress. Despite this, the court convicted her, and she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 35 years.